Hey guys, we're back. So I'm going to do some Q&A with Merlin Sheldrake here. And I'm really excited about the conversation we just had. He is an amazing author, wrote this great book, Entangled Life, that has spurred all sorts of thought experiments for me, getting really excited about fungi. And yeah, I just saw Merlin join, so we'll get him on here. And really take some questions from you guys. So for anyone who wants to give feedback to me or Merlin about stuff we talked about, or just wants to ask any questions about fungi, we're here for about 15 minutes to go over it with you. So, hey Merlin, good to see you again. So I guess it'll take people a second here to sort of filter in. But yeah, I mean, I expressed it on the last time I tried going live, but like, that was fantastic. Thank you so much for that conversation. It really is like, it's hard and rare to find people who I can nerd out with to like the nth degree kind of thing. Because usually I run into a wall where someone's like, I don't know, Gordon, that's enough. You've taken me as far as I want to go down this train of thought. So thank you for expanding my brain and my mycelial network. And it's too, one of the things I want to say about your book is I really appreciated how you did such a good job of kind of writing the line between science and philosophy, and like you said, making it very inviting to people, very accessible. And I think desperately need more of that kind of science communication in the world. So that was awesome. I'm really impressed by you, Merlin. I think it's good stuff. So someone just asked you, do you plan on writing another book soon?
Short answer, no. One thing I was thinking about, well, no, I wasn't actually. It's been a big journey to make this, and I really need to do other things for a while. There are so many things to do, and writing is one way to spend one's time and trying to contribute. But it's a very particular kind of activity, and there are other ways to explore. And so I think I'll definitely explore other things for a while before thinking about whether or not to write another book.
So I know, your brother's a musician, and he just came out with this whole album of birdsong, which I listened to. It was pretty incredible. Do you have, and you had a band, was it Mystical, what was
Gentle Mystics.
Yeah, Gentle Mystics. That was it. I listened to it, when I first heard of it, I was like, oh, I'm gonna listen to this. And I like listened to it, like, it's pretty cool, pretty funky. Do you and Cosmo have any like planned music projects together, or anything of that in that vein?
Yeah, well, we're always hatching plans. What exactly it will be is a little unclear right now, but we we love doing things together. So there'll certainly be more of that, whatever it is.
Cool. Well, certainly, I mean, I will extend an invitation if you guys ever happen to make it out to California again, post-COVID era. Hit me up. I'd love to grab a beer with you guys, or take you out on a hike or something like that. So OK Forest has just asked you, Merlin, concerning the Coprinus drawings in your book, do you have any advice for keeping Coprinus ink from molding? I kept mine in a jar in the fridge, and it molded over before I was able to use it. Sad face.
Yeah, add a bit of alcohol.
That is smart, yeah. Alcohol inhibits most fungi, definitely.
Yeah.
You might get a little bit of Brettanomyces growth. That's the thing, that Brettanomyces is like the survivor yeast. So in that succession of stuff, Brett is like the one that is like low level the whole time. And then once everything else is done, that's when Brett spikes, because it eats like the poop of all those other bacteria and things like that. So, but it's also known for giving bizarre flavors. So that's part of why I was sort of asking about Brett.
Another thing you could try is using some of the preservatives that people use in cosmetic products, in creams or balms, because those you generally need in quite low concentrations, and they don't tend to interfere too much with the properties of the substance, because people will otherwise complain about putting this on their face. So that's another way, another route.
I mean, something like potassium sorbate might work, or any one of those sort of preservative type chemicals. But I think alcohol is probably most readily available for most people working at home. So, okay, so a couple of people are asking you stuff about your dad, and feel free to answer or not answer. But someone's sort of asking if you could get a part 2 of the glorious accident, and also like how you've been influenced a little bit by your dad's work in science. And my dad's in science too, so I'm curious to know, sort of the child of another academic, how you view your relationship to your dad's work.
Well, he's an amazing student of the living world, and a lot of my curiosity about the living world was encouraged by him, and so I certainly have learned a lot from him. I've learned a lot about asking questions. I've been learned a lot about following an inquiry, and so he's been a huge influence on my life, and continues to be so. And to have someone you to talk to about ideas, about who can you just follow questions and ideas with for as long as you're happy to go. That's been a huge. He's a very free thinker and very happy to range across different subjects with very little regard for disciplinary borders or boundaries. So he's a very inspiring person to talk with. The Glorious Accident, and that's an amazing piece of TV. I don't know if you've heard of it. There's a Dutch guy who, with a leopard skin eye patch, who arranged this thing where he had my father, Daniel Dennett, Oliver Sacks, Stephen Jay Gould, Freeman Dyson. It was a long series, so there was an hour episode on each of them separately, and then there's one episode where they all came together. And so I don't think you could do this kind of TV in England or probably America, but there are obviously a lot of thoughtful TV watchers in Holland who were into this kind of extended discussion of ideas, and then they all came together and they just talked for an entire day. They couldn't actually leave. All of their food was brought to them. The guy didn't want to have any snippet of conversation taking place off camera, and so and then that was edited down to the final episode, and so that was the climax of this show. So no, I think it really could. Another one would be great.
That's cool. So this is a question I like. So someone asks you, what other fungus books do you own? And apart from your own, what book of your fungal collection would you save from a fire? If not that you guys get a whole lot of wildfires there in England, but if there was a wildfire sweeping towards your house, what would you grab?
It's a good question. I just got the new John Cage collection of John Cage's mycological works, which has been published in a nice volume, which I was very interested to read, and his fungal poetry and his the way that his obsessive interest in fungi permeated all his different kinds of thinking and explorations. That's I probably wouldn't save that from the fire though, because it's probably not the sort of
many volumes or something.
No, it's just I'd save something from the fire that I consult it all the time. Probably, but it's a book that I'd already read once and might not need to read again. I'm not sure if I'd save. So it would probably be some very thick reference work. Maybe Mushrooms Demystified. It's just
there you go. I was going to ask, because people are always asking me, hey Gordon, what mushroom book should I get? And I usually tell them I don't actually use books that much. There's one very good one that I use from my regional area, Pacific Northwest kind of thing. But for the most part, I say books are out of date unless it was published in the last 5 to 10 years. And even then, it still has a lot of names that are out of date because the taxonomic classifications are changing so quickly because of the way that the DNA sequencing and all this stuff is going. But what are your sort of go-to resources if you're out mushroom hunting and you find something you don't recognize? What do you do?
I've been exploring these online resources recently, like Mushroom Expert, and those are really helpful for the keys. But there's something about flicking through a book that I also really like. I have there's a guy called Rogers. Is it Rogers? It's Rogers. Definitely Rogers. There's a great mushroom book in England, an identification book, which I have in digital format. I like having a digital format, so it's just always there. And so he has great descriptions of the characteristics of the different genera. And if you just want a quick potted reminder of that genus and their basic characteristics, and you can find it there. So I think there's just different resources at different times and different places. But certainly the books are definitely out of date.
Yeah, but books are good, and like you said, there's something really nice about having something tangible. The thing for me that I realized pretty early on is that books were limiting because I am very much a visual learner, and so seeing photos of stuff was kind of how I learned how to ID stuff. I didn't reading the descriptions of like Mushrooms Demystified is what kind of made me feel really confused by fungi as a kid. I was like, what the heck is an umbonate, stipe or like cap, and there was just so many sort of terminology things, and I was like, I have a hard time visualizing what something that's anywhere between 2 and 12 centimeters looks like, kind of thing. So seeing lots of photos was good for me, and that's where I use the app iNaturalist a lot as sort of a nice like gateway thing for getting into IDing anything in the natural world, not just fungi. But that's and I guess that leads me a little bit to think about sort of citizen science. And have you talked at all to citizen scientists, or have you participated in any sort of projects around the UK where encouraging people to go out and look at phenology or track populations or anything like that?
I've been following the growth of citizen science from afar, but I haven't actually participated in any projects myself. But I'm really excited by it. I think it's a huge and a wonderful development, and this recovery is something of the original spirit of biology, which for most of its history was something pursued by non-professionals, out of passion and curiosity, and forming societies to share information and groups to compare notes about things and to share interest and to spread the interest. So it really feels like a wonderful consolidating process, and to pull these inquiries out of their more rarefied professional university departments. Of course, those are needed too, but this multi-pronged approach is something that I think is exciting.
Yeah, I'm so encouraged by what I've seen, at least here in America recently, of the number of potential citizen scientists entering into it and realizing that, unlike so many other parts of academic sciences, I think mycology is very much an even playing field. You don't need to have a PhD. I mean, clearly it helps to learn things and express stuff to have a PhD to learn about it, but you don't need it. Some of the best mycologists, people who are far smarter than me, don't have formal training and don't even necessarily have formal degrees, and yet they're out there every single day doing really important work, selecting strains, sequencing stuff, taking type specimens. And like you said, mycology has always been sort of a science of the people because it's so accessible. Anyone can go out there and find a mushroom and be curious about it and start trying to do the things that going down a checklist of how do I figure out what this is, how do I figure out where it fits into a larger picture of the world. So I just think that's so cool, and it's sort of encouraging. And I love that your book has come along at a time where there's definitely a rising wave of people being interested in this stuff. And I think this is maybe not the best entry point because it is a little bit, you kind of have to know some about fungi, but I think it very much invites you, if you have a base interest in fungi, this is the book to read because you're going to come away way more passionate about it than necessarily when you came into it, and with a much broader sort of mindset. So someone has asked us, the thing with fungi is that somehow I feel everything I read in your book is so familiar to me, and it's like I know this too. A knowing from the unknown, you're known, I think. I'm not sure that's a question, but that's a good statement, I guess. Do you have any thoughts on the idea of the known and the unknown and how that relates to fungus and mycology?
I think many of these themes are just such a long part of our evolutionary story that they're so deeply embedded. This idea of forming relationships, the idea of symbiotic engagements and exchanges, the idea of transformation, of interacting with one's environment, being shaped by one's environment, by engaging with one's environment. And there's just these general themes that I think are very much part of our life, even if we like to think of ourselves as highly evolved mammals with separate from the rest of the living world. There are just some things which we just can't escape. And so maybe in that sense, in that it when you see these themes in the discussion of an organism which is so different, type of organism which is so different, maybe we just tune into these parts of our lives which are like all living organisms, constrained by the very basic possibilities of life, and so can somehow identify.
Okay, so I know you probably got to go, and I've taken up a lot of your time, but I'll ask you one last sort of good question. But it's a quick note too. Entangled Life, Merlin Sheldrake. What you say, books.org, or you can buy it anywhere. But any thoughts on where to get this? Should people want to?
Bookshop.org.
That's a good one. Yeah.
That's to support indie booksellers. So Perfect. I suggest trying that first.
Okay, so someone has asked, do you believe, like Paul Stamets, that fungi are trying to communicate with us? And this gets a little bit back to the idea of like, did yeast choose us? Did we choose yeast? I guess sort of from an esoteric standpoint, what are fungi talking to us? Do they recognize us? Are we friends?
It's such a big one. in some cases, like where you have truffles, for example, and a co-evolutionary relationship with animals, not just humans, but shrews, squirrels, pigs, dogs, whatever, it lives in a forest. And their life depends on their ability to send a strong signal to these animals who can eat the truffle and disperse their spores. And so there you have a very clear case of a co-evolutionary communication going on, where the truffle smells like that because it attracts animals. And it's a sort of beacon. It's an olfactory signal that we can't ignore. So there are cases where we could answer that question quite simply and say yes, of course. Just as in the plant world, you have all these signals that signal to animals, like a fruit's red because it's ripe, so that the animal will come and know that it's ripe. So there are lots of this kind of signal that are uncontroversial. And whether or not, say, a mycelial network in a forest is communicating with someone who is just walking through that forest, it's so hard to know, isn't it? Like, how would we know? What would be the signal that the fungus was communicating with us, and how would we know whether it was or wasn't? I think these are such important questions to ask, and so I don't really have a good answer, but I do feel like we can think about this in many different ways. And if this fungus was going to communicate with us, let's just say, how would it choose to do so? What are its degrees of freedom? How does it express itself? Fungi express themselves in their growth form, which is very indeterminate. So lots of degrees of freedom there. They express themselves metabolically, lots of degrees of freedom there. So what would we expect that communication to look like? And if the fungus was trying to communicate with us and failing, then what would it try instead? I mean, I think these are all really great questions.
I mean, it gets, in your book, you talk a little bit about, is there a fungal language? How do we decode that? And, I don't think we're going to get to a point where we're going to have like a moving mycelium mouth that chats with us, because again, that's a very animal-centric view that, we could somehow engage in this type of communication with a fungus. But if we start to understand the little inputs and outputs, like you're talking about, like stuff like bioelectricity, metabolism, growth patterns, trophism to or away from certain stimuli, I think we can start to kind of get at what you're saying, is that we can look at this mushroom language and start to try to understand what it means in a broader sense, how it's interacting with its environment. We talk about stuff like quorum sensing. I brought up that sort of prion signaling thing. I have sort of a pet theory that that's a big part of how fungus and life in general potentially makes inroads towards certain developments and physiological shifts and states, that they're helping to define these things somewhat epigenetically within their own genomes, even if we're talking about like an oyster mushroom going from eating straw to eating cigarette butts or something like that. Yeah, it's
and I think one of the ways you see this happening is when in this domestications and story of domestications, and we're in this process right now as psilocybe producing mushrooms since the 50s or since the 60s. As people have started to domesticate them, work hard to find new ways to cultivate these mushrooms, and for this obvious reward for this experience, change in experience. The spread of these psilocybin mushrooms across the world has been quick, and it's been dramatic. And now there are warehouses full of them. People have them in their cupboards, on their windowsills, in their kitchens. All these new types of relationships forming between people in different places and these mushrooms. And so you can see how fast a domestication story can take place. And this chemical that might once have served a different purpose for the mushroom to produce it is now playing a very clear role, and it's definitely shaping the evolutionary fortunes of the mushrooms that produce it. And whether or not this is communication, I don't know. I think there are lots of ways that communication takes place, but falling into evolutionary step in domesticating processes, I think, is a kind of communication. There is a way in which both parties are serving the needs of the other. Whether or not it's consciously undertaken is very hard to know. But certainly there is an interplay. There's this sense of exploring each other's needs together.
Well, someone, one of my favorite mushroom accounts, wrote in all caps. It said "colonization of humans," which I think, I'm sure you've been asked this at some point, but has your interest in fungi resulted because maybe some mycelium snuck up your brainstem and now we're inoculated? And,
Oh, this is a joke. I make this joke to Paul Stamets all the time, and And of course, I could make a joke about myself too, given that I spent the last 2 years writing a book about fungi to try and communicate about these organisms to a much larger audience. I'm not sure. Who knows? Maybe this fungus, if it was infecting me, it would make it impossible for me to know that I was infected. So that could be more plausible.
They're cryptic. They're really good at I mean, we're covered in fungus. We have, you know, various species of Candida all over us all the time. And there was an interesting episode of Radiolab recently. I don't know if you've heard it. I can send it to you. But basically, they were postulating that like global warming was increasing the temperature threshold for certain opportunistic human pathogenic fungi. And because they were gaining more heat resistance, they were then able to overcome our body's main resistance to fungal pathogens, which is our temperature, the 98.6. And there's also been some evidence that like the average human body temperature is dropping some points of a degree. And so there was this widespread outbreak of these Candida albicans driven diseases. And that's sort of an interesting intersection of like where climate change and human health and fungus is all coming together. And normally we think of fungi as these things out in the woods, but there's single-celled yeast everywhere. It's ubiquitous all over us too. And so we're constantly dealing with them. It's just not something that we are aware of until it becomes an issue.
Yeah, it's a fascinating study. And these bugs, these Candida bugs, it's amazing to see all this puzzling out how this happened, how these different strains that seem to have arisen at least at the same time, but they're totally unrelated. And the pathogenicity is not some newly acquired trait. I heard another theory that maybe because of human-induced disturbance, that other fungal species that would normally outcompete them have been chased out of their niches, and so now they're moving into niches that have become available. But no, it's a fascinating story, and one that we need to pay more attention to, clearly, because these have a lot of potential to get in the way of our ambitions.
Yeah. Well, and that's a good point too. That, you know, we as human beings are so. How many soaps and things out there killed 99% and 0.9% of something? You're like, maybe I don't want something that kills that much stuff. You know, it sort of has occurred to me over the years. I was like, oh, you don't want to scorch the field. You want grass on the field. You know, you want some stuff there to help it kind of maintain. And your microbiome is very similar. You need to maintain that. We are walking, talking, living, breathing bioreactors. We have more bacterial cells in our body than we have human cells. So it makes sense to pay attention to that dynamic. And I think fungi is a very important part of that, whether that's part of our own internal microbiome, or we're consuming lots of those complex polysaccharides and bioactive molecules that are having positive, you know, anti-inflammatory health effects and stimulating our immune system. And, you know, I'm really excited because I feel kind of weird about nutritional mushroom supplements because there's a lot of snake oil along with the fact that there may be some benefit, and I'm uncomfortable ever recommending them to people because they're very expensive. I usually just say, hey, just eat lots of mushrooms. But I'm hoping somewhere in the future we get some really good double-blind clinical studies where we can show the actual positive benefit of some of these things that have been considered medicinal mushrooms and stuff like that. And I guess, do you have any sort of quick thoughts on nutritional supplements, or, you know,
we need more studies, don't we? I mean, there's a good book I got recently. Hold on. This book by Robert Rogers. This is Human Clinical Trials, a whole book on.
Oh, someone told me about this. Okay, yeah, right.
And so I haven't yet got stuck in, but there are plenty of human clinical trials. There's enough to write a short book about them, which is great, and we just need more. And I guess it's, you know, there are so many problems with the way that the biomedical industry works and the way that things are tested, and to have things tested against placebos, is it better than nothing? That's not usually the question we want to have answered. What we want to know is it better than the other possibilities, the alternatives? And so comparative effectiveness trials, more in general, in the biomedical world, could be a way for us really to find out more useful information. And so I think this research into fungi would benefit from that too.
Yeah, totally agree. Well, cool. I don't want to keep you any longer, and I am very, very thankful for you taking the time to talk to me.
Of course.
So thank you so much, Merlin. It's been an absolute joy, and thanks for just chatting with me. It's been cool.
Oh, thanks for having me. It's been great.
Okay. Be well.
Ciao.
Thanks again. Bye.